That is the epistemic component. So what will be well evaluated, and that's how the funding, science funding, directs what's actually being explored and actually directs science, and doesn't leave enough academic freedom to do whichever research researchers consider to be needed. And there we have this problem that sometimes negative results are not valued enough, because we don't know whether always the science will give something fruitful. And that's why we now have this movement to pre-register the studies and to get credit just by having a good idea, nevertheless, of what will be the actual result of the project, because some great ideas and also negative results help science. Otherwise, we might end up in this problem that people are using, not only having the natural confirmation bias, this wish that we want to be right and that our hypothesis should be true, confirmed, but also that some people engage in academic misconduct. And in the video, it is also explained that scientific misconduct might result from the pressure, existential pressure of not having a permanent position, which then increases the pressure on applying for grants. And to apply for grants, one needs a lot of publications. And there again, another misconduct can happen, and this is to use or abuse the early career researchers and their work, so to sign on their work. However, if the system is such that it pressures everyone, so the pressure is also on more senior researchers. So if there is more protection on one group, the pressure will just end up with the other group. So the only way to remove that pressure is actually to structurally change ways science is funded. But science has to be funded based on merit so that people are motivated. And the merit has to be measured in some way, and then it will, of course, be measured through publications. But then we end up again in the question, which publications are the valuable ones? So we are looping all the time, and we have to find, again, some middle reasonable way. Another problem that can happen if there is no system of this peer review or competitive grant funding, it could be the gatekeeping. That in such a situation, only people who have current positions will be deciding at elitist type of institutions, who would be deciding who will get opportunity to do science and have science funding. And the peer review process of publications, but also the peer review process of acquiring grants, did open door to many researchers that otherwise wouldn't get opportunity to form their groups and be funded. So that should be always kept in mind. Plus, this rewarding people who are working hard also makes sense. But in that happens another thing, and this is that often people who already had funding, they aggregate more funding while someone else doesn't get the opportunity because it's some sort of a game that's being played. So that's being discussed, or that big science gets funding, so that in physics, large projects get funding and a lot of funding. So there are all sort of issues there, and the contemporary research on philosophy of science advocates for some type of diverse funding schemes, so that some people even advocate for lottery allocation of funding. I'm not sure whether I would go that far, because that is not merit-based. However, after a certain threshold, if the proposals passed certain criteria, then maybe as one of the potential funding mechanisms, this could be considered. but the plurality of different types of funding potentially could benefit science. And then, of course, which projects will be funded is also determined by which type of research is considered to be beneficial for the society and needed for the society. And sometimes that's obvious, right? When you have the COVID crisis, then it's very obvious what needs to be funded. But it's important to keep in mind our previous topic, and this is that if you want a developed democratic society, you need education, and you, of course, need research in humanities.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Vlasta, I have three questions. Maybe firstly, perhaps elaborate a bit more, because I thought you made a very interesting point regarding, correct me if I'm wrong, pre-registering research. So what did you actually mean by that?
This is in psychology popular, but in some other disciplines, people would love to have it. For instance, in computer science, people would love to have it. This is you make a hypothesis, and you are assuming that your experiment will give certain results, and you're saying how you are designing your experiment, which statistical tools you will be using, which methods will you use, which literature did you use to come up with this experiment. So you're pre-registering your study. That is also good for checking whether all the methodology is correct. But it can also be pre-registered in a journal, which means that you will publish it even if the results are negative, because you have a good idea that's worth publishing.
Yeah, the hypothesis itself is valuable. So, I mean, I know some people, some researchers don't really like the H index, but would it be the case that even if someone's pre-registered their hypothesis, it'll probably give them some score in the H index, even though it's not published and peer reviewed the way it would normally be?
So it can be also published, right? So it can be published as a negative result. That is not a problem per se. Of course, negative results are less cited, but this is this idea that people should get credit for the time that they spent on some good hypothesis, and that somebody judged first just the hypothesis and the research proposal, the project proposal, and deemed it worthy. And that's what should count, because attempts count. And negative results are very important for science, because that relates to Sabine's point that kind of you shouldn't explore anything too bold. Anything too bold is risky and might give a negative result. But if you just explore something that you're certain will work out, it's different, but not too different. It's not too risky. And then you're in this safe zone, but that's not how breakthrough results come about.
I see. Okay, I think I understand. It's sort of like the broader philosophical point here is that science thrives on failure, right? I mean, in the Karl Popperian sense. So just because an experiment fails, that doesn't mean it's a failure for science. That negative result itself has value for the enterprise of science.
Absolutely.
I see that. Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
And people, but it also in this other concept. So you're crediting people for this, and you're stimulating them doing this instead of just doing something which is expected.
Yeah. And then this probably touches on the other question I want to ask you, that people can step outside of this kind of paper production loop, rat race, whatever you may call it, where researchers just produce things they know are going to get funding.